Ambassador Dae-hyun sat in the human delegation chair and watched the council chamber fill with representatives from across the galaxy. He had sat in this same chair for 15 years. The chamber looked the same as always. Tall columns reached toward the domed ceiling. Holographic displays floated above each delegation's seat. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and the strange mix of atmospheres that kept hundreds of different species comfortable. The session began like every other emergency session over the past 2 centuries. A crisis had erupted on the Outer Rim. 2 species were fighting over mining rights. Thousands were dying. The council argued about whose fault it was. Dae-hyun glanced up at the gallery where Director Hana sat with other human observers. She was reviewing data on her tablet. Her face showed no emotion, but Dae-hyun knew her well enough to see the tiredness in her eyes. Captain Taemin sat beside her in his fleet uniform. He caught Dae-hyun's glance and gave a small nod. Counselor Vexthar stood at his podium. The tall reptilian's scales gleamed under the chamber lights. His voice boomed across the room. The Outer Rim conflict requires immediate intervention. We all know who will handle this. The humans always volunteer for the dangerous work. Several counselors made sounds of agreement. Some looked bored. None offered to help. Dae-hyun remembered the Vex Talon War 20 years ago. That conflict had lasted 15 years before human negotiators arrived. His predecessor had solved it in 3 months. Dae-hyun himself had spent 5 years rebuilding the infrastructure afterward. He remembered the Great Cascade disaster. Human engineers had worked around the clock for 2 years to prevent 50 star systems from losing power. He remembered the plague that killed millions until human medical teams contained it. Perhaps the humans enjoy being heroes, Vexithar continued. His tone dripped with mockery. They have such a need to feel important, such a primitive savior complex. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Some species chuckled openly. Others smiled behind their appendages. Prime Arbiter Quonal, the ancient being who chaired the council, said nothing. His crystalline form simply pulsed with dim light. Dae-hyun felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not even hurt. Just a quiet certainty that this had gone on long enough. He thought about the numbers. Hana had shown them to him last week. Humans made up 89% of all peacekeeping forces, 76% of disaster response teams, 94% of technological innovations in the last century came from human-led research. Human worlds funded 78% of all economic aid to struggling systems, and yet here they sat, being mocked for caring too much. Dae-hyun caught Hana's eye in the gallery. She had stopped looking at her tablet. She was watching him. Taemin was watching too. They had all reached the same conclusion weeks ago. They had talked about it in private. Made plans quietly. Now the moment had arrived. Dae-hyun pressed the button to request speaking time. The holographic display above his seat lit up. Quonal's attention shifted toward him. The human delegation wishes to address the council, Quonal announced. Dae-hyun stood. The chamber fell silent. Everyone expected him to volunteer humanity's resources again, to offer ships and soldiers and negotiators, to solve their problems like humans always did. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Dae-hyun began. His voice was calm and clear. Humanity has had the privilege of serving this council for 258 years. We have learned much from our fellow species. We have grown through our cooperation and shared efforts. He paused. Several counselors were already preparing their responses, ready to thank humanity and move on to logistics. However, after careful consideration, humanity has decided to withdraw from all council obligations effective immediately. We are formally resigning our membership and recalling all human personnel from council operations. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the chamber erupted. Counselors shouted questions. Some demanded explanations. Others laughed, thinking this was some kind of negotiating tactic. Vexthar's scales flushed dark purple with rage. Quonal's crystalline form flared bright. Ambassador Dae-hyun, surely you cannot be serious. This is highly irregular. Is humanity seeking more representation? Better terms. What do you want? We want nothing, Dae-hyun said. We simply recognize that our participation here has become unsustainable. We have given much over the centuries. We are proud of what we accomplished together. But it is time for humanity to focus on our own worlds and our own people. This is outrageous, Vexthar shouted. You cannot simply abandon your duties. Daehyun looked at him calmly. We are not abandoning anything. We are choosing to step back. The council existed before humanity joined. It will continue after we leave. We have full confidence in your abilities to manage your own affairs. He gathered his materials and placed them in his case. His movements were slow and deliberate. Every eye in the chamber watched him. Humanity thanks the council for these many years of cooperation. We wish you success in all your future endeavors. Farewell. Daehyun walked toward the exit. The chamber exploded with noise behind him. Counselors demanded he return. Some threatened sanctions. Others pleaded for reconsideration. Kwonal called for order repeatedly. Daehyun stepped through the doorway and found Hana and Taemin waiting for him. They walked together down the long corridor toward the docking bay. None of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. In the docking bay, human ships were already preparing for departure. Personnel moved efficiently, loading equipment and supplies. Everyone had known this day was coming. Everyone was ready. Taemin headed to his flagship. All vessels will be ready to depart within 72 hours. Good, Hana said. Make sure every human station is evacuated. Every outpost cleared. Leave everything in good condition. No sabotage, no mess. We leave with dignity. Daehyun watched through the massive windows as human ships began moving into departure formation. 2 centuries of service. Countless lives saved. Problem solved. Peace maintained. And in the end, all they received was mockery. The word spread quickly through the station. Human technicians finished their shifts and left their posts. Human medical staff transferred their patients to other species' care. Human teachers sent their students to new instructors. Human engineers left detailed maintenance logs and shutdown procedures. Within 3 days, every human had left the council headquarters. The last ship undocked at exactly midnight station time. Taemin stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the massive station shrink in the view screen. Daehyun and Hana stood beside him. They will call us back, Hana said quietly. They will realize what they have lost. Perhaps, Daehyun replied. Or perhaps they will learn to stand on their own. Either way, it is no longer our concern. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel. The stars stretched into lines of light. The council headquarters disappeared behind them. Ahead lay Earth and the 40 human colonies. Home, rest, a chance to rebuild what they had given away piece by piece over 2 centuries. Taemin smiled slightly. They will figure it out eventually. No one answered. The truth was, none of them were sure. But it no longer mattered. Humanity had made its choice. The galaxy would have to make its own. 3 months after the humans left, Hyojun woke up to the sunrise over his farm on Earth. He walked through rows of vegetables and felt the soil with his hands. It was good Earth. Rich and dark. He had spent 40 years teaching alien worlds how to grow food in hostile environments. He had saved billions from starvation. Now he grew tomatoes for himself and sold them at the local market. His communication device buzzed for the 100th time that week. Another emergency request from a farming world. Their crops were failing. They needed help. Hyojun looked at the message and deleted it. He was retired now. He had earned his rest. Across the Sol system, Nari was teaching medical students at the University of Mars. She had spent 30 years running the Intersystem Health Organization. She had contained 3 major plagues and developed vaccines for 17 diseases. Now she taught young humans about anatomy and smiled when they got excited about their first successful surgeries. Her device showed 53 missed calls from council medical facilities. A new outbreak had started. They were begging for her expertise. She turned off her device and continued her lecture. On Europa Station, Kwon was creating an ice sculpture. The engineer had once maintained the entire gate network that connected the galaxy. He had kept 5,000 faster-than-light gates working perfectly for 20 years. Now he made art from frozen water and found peace in the simple beauty of it. His old supervisor from the gate network had sent him 300 messages. Gates were failing across the galaxy. People were stranded. Ships were lost. Only Kwon knew the systems well enough to fix them. He read one message, felt a stab of pain in his chest, and went back to his sculpture. The council was discovering something they had never noticed before. Humans had not just done the big visible jobs. They had done 10,000 small invisible tasks every day. Communication relays that humans maintained without being asked were going silent. Medical supply chains that humans organized were breaking down. Trade routes that human ships patrolled were becoming dangerous again. Administrator Thelvin discovered the truth by accident. He was trying to restore a minor station's life support system. He found the maintenance logs. A human technician had visited the station every 2 weeks for 30 years. The log showed 847 different small repairs, adjustments to air filters, recalibrations of water recyclers, updates to safety systems. The technician had never filed reports or asked for recognition. They had just done the work. Thelvin realized that every station probably had similar logs. Every system, every gate, every relay. Humans had been holding the galaxy together with countless small acts of care. He presented his findings to the council. Quona listened carefully. Vexthar dismissed it. "We managed before the humans arrived," Vexthar said. "We will manage now that they are gone. We do not need them." We never did. The council voted to handle everything themselves. Different species volunteered for different tasks. The Relians would take over peacekeeping. The Centrians would manage medical response. Multiple species would share the gate network maintenance. The Relian peacekeepers deployed to the Outer Rim conflict 3 weeks later. They arrived with overwhelming force and no diplomatic training. Within 2 days, they had made the situation worse. The conflict spread to 3 neighboring systems. Casualties increased by 400%. The Centrians sent medical teams to contain the new plague outbreak. They set up quarantine zones using their own protocols. The protocols were not as thorough as human methods. The plague spread to 3 more systems before anyone realized what had happened. Death counts climbed into the millions. The gate network continued to decay. Multiple species sent engineers to handle maintenance. They followed the human technical manuals. But the manuals could not capture 2 centuries of practical experience. 3 major gates collapsed in 1 week. Ships carrying refugees were stranded between systems. 4 million people died waiting for rescue that never came. The Outer Rim conflict that had started everything grew worse every day. Without human mediators, the 2 species remembered every historical grievance. Ancient hatred surfaced. War crimes began. Entire planets were bombed. Children died in school buildings. The violence was horrifying. The council called more emergency sessions. They argued about solutions. They blamed each other. They passed resolutions. Nothing worked. Some counselors suggested contacting humanity, asking for help, apologizing. But Vexthar and others refused. "We will not beg," Vexthar declared. "The humans abandoned us. They sabotaged systems before they left. This is their fault, not ours." This idea spread, a conspiracy theory that humans had deliberately damaged everything to make the council look bad. It was easier to believe than accepting they had taken humans for granted. Meanwhile, humanity watched from Earth and the colonies. News feeds showed the chaos, the wars, the plagues, the collapsing infrastructure. Many humans felt guilty for not helping. Some wanted to return. Young Su represented this new generation. He was only 25. He had never served on the council. He organized protests on Earth demanding that humanity intervene. "We have a moral duty," he told crowds. "People are dying. We can help. We should help." But the older generation held firm. Daehyun spoke at a counter-rally. "We helped for 258 years, he said quietly. "We gave everything we had. Our time, our resources, our lives. And we were mocked for it. At some point, you must let others learn to help themselves, even if the lesson is hard." The debate raged across human worlds, but no decision was made to return. Thelvin kept discovering more evidence of human contributions. He found records showing humans had mediated 847 conflicts in the past 2 centuries. They had prevented 23 potential extinction events through agricultural technology. They had increased average lifespan across the galaxy by 40 years through medical innovation. He compiled everything into a report. Many counselors refused to read it. They did not want to face their own failure. The economic situation grew dire. Without human-backed currency stabilization, markets crashed. The council's shared credit system collapsed. Trade between systems broke down. Resource shortages spread. Some worlds began hoarding food and medicine. Others faced starvation. Pirates returned to the trade routes. Without human patrol ships, they attacked with impunity. Merchant vessels were destroyed. Cargo was stolen. Trade practically stopped in some sectors. A natural disaster struck a major industrial world. Massive earthquakes destroyed 3 major cities. In the past, human disaster response teams would have arrived within hours. Now the council scrambled to organize a response. It took 3 weeks to deploy help. By then, millions had died in the rubble. Quanal finally began to understand. He called Vexthar to his private chambers. "We made a mistake," Quanal said. His crystalline form pulsed with dim, sad light. "We took them for granted. We mocked them for caring. Now we are paying the price. We can still manage without them," Vexthar insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Look at the death counts," Quanal said. 8 months without humans. 15 billion dead. How many more before we admit the truth? An unofficial delegation arrived at Earth's orbital station. They carried no formal credentials. They represented no official policy. They simply came to ask if humanity would reconsider. They were not allowed past the station's main lobby. A young human administrator met them briefly. "Humanity wishes the council well," she said politely. "But we are not returning. We have made our choice. You must make yours." The delegates returned to council space empty-handed. The crisis deepened, and humanity remained silent, watching from afar, waiting to see if the galaxy could learn to save itself. 8 months had passed since humanity left the council. Former Admiral Jinho taught military history. At the Naval Academy on Titan, he stood before a classroom of young officers and explained the concept of sustainable warfare. "A military force is only as good as its supply lines," he said. "A peacekeeping mission is only as successful as its diplomatic foundation. Violence without strategy is just murder. The council is learning this lesson right now. They are paying for it with blood." His students watched footage from the Outer Rim conflict. What had started as a mining dispute now involved 17 species across 40 systems. The death toll had reached 3 billion. Battle tactics were primitive and brutal. No one was trying to minimize casualties. No one was protecting civilians. There were no human-led tribunals to prevent war crimes, so war crimes happened constantly. Jinho felt sick watching it. He had spent 50 years preventing exactly this kind of horror. But he stayed in his classroom and continued teaching. Going back would solve nothing. The council had to learn. Suman sat in her apartment on Earth and watched the galactic economy collapse in real time. She had directed the Council Economics Division for 20 years. She had prevented 12 major market crashes and helped 70 struggling systems rebuild their economies. Now she watched everything she had built fall apart. The Council's shared currency had lost 90% of its value. Trade between systems had dropped by 85%. 60 systems were experiencing economic depression. 20 more faced complete financial collapse. Refugee populations were exploding as people fled failing worlds. She wrote papers about what was happening. Academic analysis of systemic failure. Other economists read her work and understood. The council had built its economy on human support without realizing it. Like a building with a hidden foundation, everything looked stable until that foundation was removed. Mirai worked as a psychologist in New Seoul. Many of her patients were former council workers. They came to her with guilt and nightmares. They had the skills to help, the knowledge to save lives, but they stayed home while billions died. "I keep seeing the messages," one patient told her, a former medical technician. "They are begging for help. They need me. I know exactly how to stop the plague, but I do not go. Does that make me evil?" "No," Mirai said gently. "It makes you human. You gave 40 years of your life to service. You saved millions. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to have boundaries. But people are dying. People were dying when you worked for the council too. You cannot save everyone. You cannot sacrifice yourself forever. That is what the council needs to learn. That help must be earned. That partnership requires respect." The patient cried. Mirai held their hand. This conversation happened a dozen times every day in offices across human worlds. The gate network was failing faster than anyone predicted. Quan received a message from his old team. It was not a request for help. It was a goodbye. They were abandoning their post because without human expertise, the whole network would collapse within months. They did not want to die at their stations when it happened. Quan stared at the message for an hour. 5,000 gates connecting the galaxy. Millions of ships depending on them every day. If the network collapsed completely, galactic civilization would fragment into isolated systems. It would take centuries to rebuild. He almost broke, almost packed his tools and went back. But then he remembered why he left. The mockery. The disrespect. The assumption that humans would always be there to fix everything. He deleted the message and returned to his ice sculpture. The council passed emergency resolutions. Every species was required to contribute resources to peacekeeping. Forced conscription. Mandatory resource sharing. Draconian security measures. They hoped these harsh policies would stabilize the situation. Instead, they bred resentment and rebellion. Species that had never contributed before refused to start now. Some withdrew from the council entirely. Others formed their own local alliances. The council's authority was crumbling. Quonal called emergency meeting after emergency meeting. The council chamber was half empty now. Many representatives had stopped attending. Those who came spent hours arguing and accomplished nothing. Delvin presented his complete analysis of human contributions. The numbers were devastating. In the past 2 centuries, humans had mediated conflicts that would have killed 847 billion people. They had prevented economic collapses that would have impoverished 300 systems. Their medical innovations had saved countless lives. Their agricultural technology had prevented mass starvations on 120 worlds. We took all of this for granted, Thelvin said. We thought the galaxy simply worked this way. We never realized it only worked because humans made it work. Bexthar still refused to accept responsibility. They should have taught us. They should have shared their knowledge better. This is still their failure, not ours. But fewer counselors believed him now. The evidence was overwhelming. The galaxy was collapsing because humans had been holding it together all along. Then disaster struck the council's home sector. A massive solar flare hit 3 densely populated worlds. Radiation storms killed power systems. Billions were at risk from exposure, starvation, and system failures. In the past, human disaster response teams would have arrived within 6 hours. They had ships stationed strategically across the galaxy for exactly this kind of emergency. They had protocols, training, equipment. They could evacuate billions from disaster zones in days. The council tried to organize its own response. Ships were too far away. Equipment was incompatible between species. Protocols did not exist. Communication broke down. Species argued about who should take the lead. 3 weeks later, help finally arrived. 4 billion people were already dead. The survivors were traumatized and furious. How could the council fail so completely? Quonal finally broke. He sent a personal message to Earth. Not an official request. Not a demand. Just a message from one leader to another. We were wrong, he wrote to Dae Hyun. We mocked your service. We took your sacrifice for granted. We assumed you would always be there. Now billions are dead because of our pride and ignorance. I do not ask you to return. I do not ask for forgiveness. I only ask that you know we finally understand what we lost. Dae Hyun read the message in his small apartment. He sat for a long time thinking. Then he sent a brief reply. The galaxy must learn to stand on its own. This lesson is painful but necessary. When you are ready to build something new, something based on mutual respect and shared responsibility, perhaps we can talk again. Until then, we wish you strength. Quonal read the reply and wept. His crystalline form flickered with grief. He had led the council for 3 centuries. He had overseen an era of peace and prosperity. Now he would be remembered as the leader who let everything collapse. Youngsu organized another rally on Earth. Thousands of young humans demanded intervention. We cannot watch the galaxy burn, they chanted. We have a duty to help. Jinho attended the rally. He asked to speak. The crowd went quiet. They knew his reputation. You are right that people are dying, he said. You are right that we could help. But answer me this. If we return now, what will be different? Will the council respect us? Will they share the burden? Or will we simply rebuild everything while they watch and then mock us again in 50 years? The crowd had no answer. Change must come from within, Jinho continued. The council must choose to transform. We cannot force that transformation. We can only wait and hope they learn before too many more die. It is a terrible choice, but it is the only choice that leads to lasting change. The rally dispersed quietly. People went home troubled and uncertain. But no one called for immediate return anymore. Across the galaxy, the crisis deepened. Wars spread. Plagues killed. Systems failed. The great cascade of collapse continued, and humanity watched in silence, holding firm to their decision, hoping the lesson would be learned before the galaxy destroyed itself completely. 14 months after the departure, Ambassador Dae-hyun sat in his small garden writing his memoirs. He wrote about the early days when humanity first joined the council. The excitement and hope. The belief that they could make a difference. He wrote about the slow realization that they were not partners but servants. He wrote about the final decision to leave. His hands were old now. Writing was harder than it used to be. But the memories were clear. Every negotiation, every crisis, every small victory and large sacrifice. He wanted future generations to understand why humanity had served so long, and why they had finally walked away. Ji-won was one of those future generations. She was a journalist who had spent the past year documenting the withdrawal and its aftermath. She traveled across human worlds interviewing everyone involved. She accessed council broadcasts and reports. She compiled the most complete picture of what had happened and what it meant. Her documentary was called The Great Silence. It premiered on Earth to massive audiences. People watched in stunned recognition as she revealed the full scope of human contributions to the galaxy. The numbers were staggering. In 258 years, humans had mediated 847 major conflicts. They had prevented 23 mass extinction events through agricultural innovation. They had increased average galactic lifespan by 40 years through medical breakthroughs. They had funded 78% of all aid to struggling systems. They had provided the backbone for galactic civilization without ever demanding recognition. We did not serve for glory, Dae-hyun said in an interview with Ji-won. We served because we believed in cooperation. We believed that species working together could achieve great things. We were not wrong about that. But cooperation requires mutual respect. It requires that all parties contribute. The council forgot that. They treated us as infinite resources rather than partners. Ji-won interviewed Hana next. The former director looked tired but peaceful. The hardest part was not leaving, Hana said. The hardest part was staying away. Every day I see reports of disasters we could prevent. Plagues we could cure. Wars we could stop. But if we return now, nothing will change. They will welcome us back, use our help, and forget the lesson. We must let them struggle. We must let them grow. She spoke with Kwan on Europa Station. The engineer showed her his ice sculptures. Beautiful frozen forms that caught the light. I dream about the gate network, Kwan admitted. I see the gates failing in my sleep. I know exactly how to fix them. The knowledge burns inside me. But I also know that if I go back, they will never learn to maintain the system themselves. They will always depend on me. So I make ice sculptures instead and try to find peace. Young-soo represented a different perspective. He was part of the generation that had never served on the council. I understand why the older generation left, he told Ji-won. But I question why they stayed so long. Why did we give so much for so little recognition? Why did we accept being taken for granted for over 2 centuries? Perhaps the real lesson is not just for the council. Perhaps it is for us too. Perhaps we need to learn to value ourselves properly. His words resonated with many young humans. A cultural shift was happening. The generation that had served was tired and wounded. The new generation was proud and self-assured. They would not repeat their parents' mistakes. Meanwhile, the council was transforming. Not by choice, but by necessity. The death toll had reached 20 billion. Entire species were on the brink of extinction. Economic collapse had impoverished 300 systems. The old order was gone. Something new had to emerge. Thelvin led the reform movement. He was not from a powerful species. He held no ancient authority, but he had data and truth on his side. He showed the council exactly how they had failed. We built our civilization on someone else's labor, he told them. We enjoyed peace maintained by someone else's sacrifice. We benefited from innovation we did not create, and when they finally said enough, we blamed them instead of looking at ourselves. Vexthar was forced to resign. His own people removed him from office in disgrace. Other government leaders fell as populations demanded accountability. The political upheaval was massive. New leaders emerged. Younger voices, species that had been marginalized before. They began implementing real reforms. Mandatory contribution requirements for all members. Investment in education and self-sufficiency. Cultural programs promoting responsibility and cooperation. An official apology to humanity for centuries of exploitation. Kwon-al stepped down from his position as prime arbiter. He was too old, too associated with the failures. But before he left, he established a new tradition. Every year, the council would observe a day of silence. A day to remember when humanity left and what it taught them. Let this day remind us forever, Quanal said in his final address. Partners must be valued. Service must be recognized. Cooperation requires contribution from all parties. We forgot these truths. Billions died because of our forgetting. May we never forget again. The gate network crisis came to a head in the 14th month. The main hub gates were failing. If they collapsed, the entire network would fragment. Travel between sectors would become impossible. Galactic civilization would effectively end. The Council's engineers tried everything. They followed human manuals. They consulted experts from a dozen species. Nothing worked. The gates were too complex. Only humans truly understood them. This became the test. Would the new Council beg for human help? Would they demand it? Would they try to force it? They did none of these things. Instead, Thelvin sent a simple message to Earth. We understand that we have no right to ask for your help. We understand that we failed you and ourselves. But we want you to know that we are trying to change. We are building something better. If you wish to observe these changes, you are welcome. If you wish to remain distant, we understand. We will continue regardless. The galaxy must learn to stand or fall on its own merit. The message was distributed across human worlds. People debated what it meant. Some saw genuine change. Others saw manipulation. Most were simply unsure. Quanal made a personal journey to Earth. He came alone with no official status or authority. Just an old being seeking forgiveness before he died. He was allowed to land. Not at any government facility, but at Daehyun's house. The two old leaders sat in the garden where Daehyun had been writing his memoirs. I do not ask you to return, Quanal said. I do not ask you to forgive. I only want you to know that I finally understand. You were never our servants. You were our partners, and we failed to treat you as such. That failure has cost billions of lives. I will carry that weight until I die. Daehyun poured tea for them both. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke. The young people ask me if we made the right choice. If the deaths are our fault, I tell them that responsibility lies with those who failed to act, not with those who refused to enable that failure. You had 258 years to learn. We gave you every opportunity. The lesson was simply painful when it finally came. It was, Quanal agreed, but perhaps necessary. Perhaps the only way we could truly change. They talked until sunset. When Quanal left, they parted with mutual respect. Not as representatives of their peoples, but as two individuals who had lived through history and understood its weight. The galaxy was broken. Billions had died. Civilizations had fallen. But in the ruins, something new was beginning to grow. The Council was learning to stand on its own, and humanity was learning to value itself. Both lessons had been bought with terrible cost. But perhaps finally they had been learned. 2 years after humanity left the Council, Young-Su stood before the human parliament on Mars. He was 30 years old now and had been elected to represent his generation. The chamber was full. This was the most important vote in recent history. The Council has sent another request, Young-Su said, not for us to return as we were, but to consider a new relationship. They have implemented reforms. They have changed their structure. They are asking if we will witness these changes and possibly engage again as true partners. The chamber erupted in debate. Some humans wanted nothing to do with the Council ever again. Others believed that isolation served no one. The discussion lasted for hours. Daehyun sat in the gallery. He was retired from politics but still held influence. When the debate reached an impasse, the speaker asked for his thoughts. I cannot tell you what to choose, Daehyun said, but I can tell you what we learned. Service without respect destroys both the giver and receiver. Partnership requires that all parties contribute and acknowledge each other's worth. If the Council has truly learned this, then perhaps a new relationship is possible. If they have not, then we would only repeat the same mistakes. The Parliament called for witnesses. They wanted to hear from Council representatives directly. Thelvin arrived a week later. He brought documentation of everything that had changed. We have implemented mandatory burden sharing, he explained. Every species must contribute to peacekeeping, medical response, and infrastructure maintenance. No more letting one species carry the load. We have created compensation systems for past contributions. We are building our own expertise instead of depending on others. And most importantly, we have granted veto power over military deployments to any species that contributes significantly to peacekeeping forces. These are just rules, someone challenged. Rules can be changed. You're right, Thelvin agreed. Which is why we are also asking for cultural change. We have established education programs teaching the history of human contributions. We celebrate the Day of Silence every year. We are building monuments to honor those who served. We want our children to understand what we took for granted and never repeat it. The Parliament took a month to decide. During that time, something unexpected happened. Quan made a personal choice. He could not watch the Gate network collapse. Not because the Council asked him to save it, but because he cared about the people who would die if it failed. He packed his tools and traveled to the main hub. No official mission, no human government approval, just one engineer who loved his work. When he arrived, he found Council engineers struggling with a problem. They had been working for 3 months with no progress. Quan studied the situation for 2 hours and found the solution. It was elegant and simple. He showed them how to fix it. But why did you come? One engineer asked. Your people abandoned us. My people set boundaries, Quan corrected. There is a difference. I came because I choose to help, not because anyone demanded it. That choice makes all the difference. Word spread quickly. Other humans began making similar choices. A medical researcher named Sora traveled to a plague zone, not as part of any official mission, but because she had developed a cure and people were dying. A negotiator named Tay went to a war zone, not because humanity sent him, but because he believed he could save lives. These were not official actions. The human government neither encouraged nor prevented them, but they represented something important. Humans choosing to help when and how they wished, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. The human parliament finally voted. They agreed to limited re-engagement with specific conditions, equal burden sharing with verification systems, formal recognition and compensation for contributions. Humanity would hold veto power over military operations. Human council workers would have mandatory rest periods and could not be assigned more than 4 years consecutively. And most importantly, any species could vote no confidence in the partnership if these terms were violated. We are not returning as we were, Youngsu announced. We are entering a new relationship based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. We will start small. A few diplomats, some technical advisors. We will watch how the Council honors its commitments. If they prove genuine, we will expand cooperation. If they fall back into old patterns, we will withdraw again. But this time, we go in with open eyes and firm boundaries. The Council accepted the terms immediately. They had no leverage to negotiate. They had learned that lesson thoroughly. The transformation was measurable. Within 6 months, 15 species were contributing significantly to peacekeeping forces. Medical response became truly collaborative, with different species bringing unique expertise. The Gate network stabilization became a shared project with 7 species working together. Death rates from conflicts dropped by 60%. Economic stability slowly returned. It was not perfect. Old habits died hard. Some species still tried to avoid their share of work. Some still looked to humans to solve difficult problems. But the structure held. When species failed to contribute, they faced consequences. When they tried to exploit human generosity, humans simply said no. Quonal died in the 3rd year after the withdrawal. His final words were recorded for history. I spent 3 centuries leading the Council. I thought I understood leadership. But I was wrong. True leadership means recognizing the contributions of others. It means sharing burdens, not hoarding authority. I learned this too late. Let my failure teach future generations. Vexthar lived in exile on a remote world. He remained bitter until the end, insisting that humanity had overreacted. But no one listened anymore. He had become a symbol of the old way of thinking, a cautionary tale taught to young people across the galaxy. Daehyun watched the new generation lead humanity into this transformed relationship. They were smarter than his generation had been. They set clear boundaries. They demanded respect. They walked away from situations that were unhealthy. He was proud of them. Did we make the right choice? Han asked him one day. They were old now. Their time was ending. Yes, Daehyun said without hesitation. We could have stayed and continued serving. Billions more might have lived in the short term. But the galaxy would never have learned. The exploitation would have continued forever. Sometimes the hard choice is the right choice. Humanity also transformed during these years. Without council obligations consuming their resources, human civilization flourished. Technology advanced rapidly. Arts and culture experienced a renaissance. Quality of life improved dramatically across all human worlds. They achieved true post-scarcity economics. Poverty was eliminated. Education reached everyone. Healthcare became universal. Most importantly, humanity began exploring beyond council space. They sent ships in the opposite direction, into uncharted regions of the galaxy. They discovered new civilizations. This time they approached as partners from the beginning. They shared knowledge freely, but also set clear expectations. They helped but never allowed themselves to be exploited. These new civilizations thrived in ways that council species had not. Because the relationship was healthy from the start, because boundaries were established early, because both sides contributed and respected each other. A joint expedition was planned in the 4th year, human and council ships working together to explore the galactic core. It would be the first major collaborative project under the new partnership terms. 50 ships from 20 species, including 10 human vessels. True cooperation. True partnership. Daehyun and Hana watched the launch from Earth. The ships lifted off together, forming a beautiful constellation as they climbed toward orbit. Then they jumped to faster-than-light travel and vanished into the stars. Was it worth it? Hana asked quietly. All the pain, all the death, all the waiting. Daehyun thought about the question for a long time. He thought about the 20 billion who had died during the crisis, the suffering that could have been prevented, but he also thought about the galaxy that was emerging, one where burden was shared, where contribution was recognized, where partnership meant partnership, not servitude. Yes, he said finally. They had to learn to stand. We had to learn to let them. It was the hardest thing we ever did. But look at them now. They are standing, and we are standing beside them as equals, not beneath them as servants. That is worth any price, Hana nodded. They sat together in comfortable silence and watched the stars. Across the galaxy, monuments stood honoring human service. The Day of Silence was observed faithfully each year. Children learned about the mistakes of the past. And slowly, painfully, the galaxy healed. The council was genuinely stronger now. Not because one species carried everyone else, but because everyone contributed. Innovation became multi-directional. Different species brought different strengths. Humans excelled at adaptability and compassion. Others brought different gifts. Together they built something more sustainable than what had existed before. It was not the galaxy humanity had left 2 years earlier. It was something new, something better, built on the ruins of the old system, paid for with terrible suffering, but perhaps finally built to last. Young Su led humanity with wisdom beyond his years. He never forgot the lessons learned, never allowed his generation to repeat the mistakes of the past.